Hello and welcome to another cybersecurity podcast. Today we're talking about the cybersecurity challenges in the legal sector. And to help us with that, we have a very special guest, Arun Chauhan. He's the director and founder of Tenet Law. And we have the Aristi team, our CTO, Rob Jervis, and our cybersecurity and privacy specialist, Alison Bayliss. So welcome everyone to the podcast. Arun, can we start with you? If you want to just tell us a little bit about your experience in the legal sector.
Yeah, thanks, Hutch, and thanks for having me on today. So, I'm a lawyer. I run the law firm Tenet Law. We specialise in disputes, investigations and compliance regulatory advice arising out of fraud and financial crime. I've been a lawyer for 20 plus years. I previously was quite a big law firm, a partner there called DWF, so I've had the experience of working in quite a Goliath firm, and then now I've been running Tenet for about 9 years.
Okay. And Arun, you're no stranger to cameras because you're also an advisor to the BBC.
Yeah,
a little bit about that.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. So for about 9 years, I've been working with the BBC as an expert contributor, I think is how they call me. So I work on shows like Panorama, BBC's Rip Off Britain, been on the news, Sky News, do stuff like Moneybox. So try to bring fraud education to life, I suppose.
Right, so you're a bit of a celeb.
Not even in my own house.
So let's talk a little bit about the legal sector then, Arun. So, before we do that, just tell us a little bit about your specialism. So you specialise in litigation.
Yeah, so the majority of the work at Tenet is dealing with fraud litigation disputes. So it's disputes where there's wrongdoing, there's something where someone's been dishonest. So it could be in the context of employees stealing, could be data, could be assets, physical assets, could be money, procurement, bribery, corruption, investment fraud. So a whole range of dishonest actions and helping people recover their money and the assets from those situations.
So in terms of the assets that a typical law firm would hold, just tell us a little bit about that. So there's case files, there's data,
Yeah, so it depends on the type of service, but predominantly, lawyers are historically over many, many years have dealt with a lot of paperwork. Paperwork is now in digital form. So we have a lot of assets in terms of information that we have on behalf of clients and opponents, as well as other third parties. So that could be everything from just personal data. We obviously know everything about our clients because we have to do anti-money laundering checks. So we've got the copies of their passport or driving license. So really important identity documents. But then we have information about them from their numbers, their email addresses, contact details for maybe family members. But then you've got all the data about their case.
Right.
And depending on the type of law you deal with, that can be really highly sensitive commercial data. So it could be valuable data on the stock market. It could be criminal defense data. So it could be really important information about witnesses and anonymity of witnesses. So it's the biggest asset we hold, and we almost, as an industry, take it for granted that we have all this data, but we don't actually stand back and think how valuable it is in the hands of the wrong people.
Yeah. And is this stored generally in paper form, or is it digital, or is it a combination?
Yeah, the world's kicked on quite a lot now, hasn't it? So it's all stored digitally, but we still seem, as an industry, to have a lot of paper files.
Right.
Lawyers are institutionalized as a kind of species. We like to still print things. We still like to annotate on Word documents.
Yeah.
The next generation's coming through and mostly doing everything on digital platforms and so on. But we will store our work product in cloud-based software or practice management cloud-based software. Typically, sometimes it'll be on local servers. But, certainly in things like property transactions, there's still a lot of paper files. A lot of documents are sent through the post as well as electronically, for example, from the land registry.
Okay.
So again, there's a lot of data in different formats sitting around.
Okay. And in terms of the impact of loss of that data or even sort of unauthorized access of some of that data, what's the worst case scenario here?
Well, some really serious consequences, aren't there, if you lose your customers' data? Firstly, if you look at it from a quite selfish perspective as the law firm, I've been running this law firm for 9 years, you've got reputational damage. You've got to talk to your clients quite soon if their data's been compromised. I think someone said to me, it's a lot easier to recover from the truth than it is from a lie. But I can imagine certain circumstances, organisations, not just in the law, other professional services would try to scramble to come up with a reason with what's happened.
Right.
So you've got reputational damage, financial damage. The chances are some of those clients might say, well, we don't feel safe in your hands, so we're going to leave. and take our work elsewhere.
Okay.
You've got the financial damage they might suffer. Obviously, you've got to do your risk assessment, and I'm sure you'll all talk about that. But we'd go to the ICO and we'd be reporting that. We'd then be telling the clients. So there's financial damage. Then they've got the damage of what happens if it goes into the marketplace.
Right.
There's the wider reputational damage, but do you cause any damage financially to others who aren't your clients?
Okay.
And that's at risk as well.
So the impacts, the distress is, to the public, the people involved in the case, but also reputationally to the organisation that's holding the data, because there's an expectation, isn't there, that you would keep that information safe?
Yeah, it's almost it's like an unwritten, basic level of understanding with your client. If they give you your data, you've got to look after that data and keep it safe. Got to keep it protected, and it can't go into the hands of the wrong people. And that's really important, not just for the law firm owners, but for every employee in a law firm. Because if you have a data situation, a breach, or you have a denial of service or some kind of attack, your employees are part of that journey. And so, it's the other impact is on your team and productivity, morale. If this happens, what's going to happen to them and their roles.
So, Alison, can I just bring you in here, particularly in the sort of the data protection side? Just talk us through some of the data protection requirements that not just in the legal sector, I guess any sector where you have lots of personal information. What sort of things would you expect them to have?
I think the most important thing, particularly when we see some of the examples of, sort of unfortunate breaches within the legal sector, is around having the right organisational and technical controls in place to secure information. Obviously, you've got all the other principles, but I would say fundamentally that's actually really important, because that's certainly what we're seeing. We're seeing examples of where, people are being targeted and their information is being placed on the dark web. And that could be information about vulnerable individuals, because actually sometimes people actually engage with a law firm when they're at their most vulnerable.
Yeah.
So you might, if you're talking about things like criminal activity, then it could be witnesses, it could be vulnerable people that have been involved. It could be, we're talking about sensitive, special category information in a lot of cases. So it's about protecting that and making sure that all the usual things are in place about restricting access, so it's only accessible to the right people, that the right controls are in place from a technical perspective, that people are trained and they're aware, and that they're able to actually, sort of ensure that they are upholding all of those data protection principles around actually only using the minimum amount of information and making sure that it's secure and making sure that it's, sort of only kept for as long as necessary. And some of those things will be well regulated within the legal sector. But I would say primarily the most important thing, based on the examples of some of the issues that are being seen, is about having those right security controls in place to protect the confidentiality, integrity and the availability of that information.
So we are seeing that the legal sector is a target for criminals, predominantly because of the kind of information that you hold, as Aaron, you've explained. Studies done by the Law Society talk about something like 65% of law firms have faced a cyber incident, yet many still don't have cyber mitigation plans in place. So I guess what they're saying perhaps is that there's still a journey that the legal sector has to go on to reach that maturity, the level of maturity where, the good practice is part of the behaviour of the organisation. And it's not just the legal sector, to be fair. I think a lot of sectors are like this, where, it isn't normal to have really good security, or security isn't built into the business processes. Alison, you do a lot of audits, don't you? Yeah. When you sort of NIST audits and GDPR audits, is that the kind of thing you see when you're conducting one of these audits?
Yeah, I think sometimes one of the fundamental things that we see quite often is actually an uncertainty and a lack of knowledge around what contracts are in place with third parties that are there to support organisations.
Yeah.
So quite often an organisation will say, actually, I'm not a technical expert, so I'll outsource my IT, for example, or I'll outsource certain parts of, sort of my business to a third party. But it's really important that they make sure that those third parties are actually understand what security requirements are, understand the level of information that they're actually, sort of potentially processing on behalf of the organisation or supporting, and making sure that that's in place. But yeah, and often as well, roles and responsibilities, it's really important where organisations are using third parties to help them, that those roles and responsibilities are understood, because that means that you can make sure you've got the right controls in place, throughout business as usual. And then in the unfortunate event of an incident, then you can make sure that you actually know where the roles and responsibilities lie for actually responding and recovering from that.
So, Aaron, in terms of the systems that typical, so you're now the expert of all in the whole sector. So, in the legal sector, what kind of systems do exist? So, case management systems, cloud-based systems, or is there a combination of?
Yeah, so there's quite a lot of software out there for law firms. So let's just start with the kind of basics of communication. There might be a good example of a case I've just thought of, which we can talk through as well, just to show how it can be complicated and cause loss. So we've got, everyone's pretty much using Microsoft for emails. Some organizations use SharePoint for their client documents and retention of documents. There is time recording software. Sometimes that's just standard time recording software alone. So lawyers, they tend to charge by the minute. So goes the room. But no, we charge by, sometimes it's a tenth of an hour. So there's time recording on different times of work we're doing.
Okay.
Sometimes that time recording software is linked in with software which is about financial information for the firm. And then you've got other practice management software that tries to do all of these things in one, apart from the email from Microsoft, and store all your emails. Or you could have separate email storage software as well.
Right.
So you could have 4 or 5 different pieces of software enabling your firm to run, store data, communicate with each other. And that naturally creates risk, because if there's a weakness in one aspect of that software, it can be the gateway, I suppose, to... And
is this software that's installed locally, or is it in the cloud or in a third-party data center? Or?
So in our experience, or the way we run the firm, everything's in the cloud. Nothing's stored locally. Right. So we go through a process of due diligence on who we're working with, stuff like encryption level, where's the data stored, and how safe is it, ostensibly. So then when we are ever having to engage with the Solicitors Regulation Authority, if we're ever asked about it, we can give them assurance that we're assured our client's data is safe.
Okay. So I want to bring Rob in. And the cloud was the prompt, really, Rob. So storing data in the cloud. So cloud, obviously, there's, we see a lot of, that's how, data is stored these days in the cloud. Can we assume then that when we go out and consume a service that's cloud-based, can we assume that it's all secure and the cloud provider is providing enough security? Or do we need to do something else? Is there a responsibility on the client?
Yeah, I think there's always a responsibility on the client to go through that sort of assurance process that we were just discussing, really, to ensure that the kind of the offering of that cloud provider meets the requirements of that organisation. So each organisation, in this case, specific legal firms, will have some similar requirements, but they might also have distinctly specific requirements that meet their own, customer base. And it's important that those products and services are assessed against those criteria, just to ensure that the right level of controls are in place.
Okay.
Quite often in a number of these sort of cloud and SaaS type products, there'll also be a range of security controls available, but they won't necessarily all be enabled.
Right.
So some of those things might be present. And then it's just a case of that firm understanding, okay, for our risk profile, we need to ensure that this and this feature are enabled, for example. Okay. Because even though they're in the platform, they might not be present and operational.
So some of the threats that we see, sort of that are relevant to, well, not just cloud, I suppose they're relevant to on-site, on-prem infrastructure as well. So things like ransomware, we see a lot of that type of threat currently. So, Rob, if you were advising a law firm on what they should be doing to protect against a ransomware attack, what kind of things would you say?
So I think probably the key controls that are in the Cyber Essentials standard are really applicable here.
Right.
So controls around authentication, multi-factor authentication, strong passwords, those kinds of things. Ensuring that there's a secure boundary, so looking at firewalls. Obviously, malware protection on the endpoints as well. And I think also when we talk about this sort of hybrid position between on-prem and cloud services, if that data is in the cloud and secure and there's authentication and things up front of that case management software, if that endpoint isn't secure, if ransomware or an attacker's able to get a position on that endpoint, they'll be able to do things like steal authentication, session tokens, that kind of thing for the application. And then they'll be able to access that data from another location, from the cloud platform directly, but maybe not because of a weakness in the cloud platform, but a weakness in another part of the infrastructure. So, for example, the user's endpoint. So that kind of end-to-end security piece is
that's
really important.
Isn't it? So Cyber Essentials, so it's a national scheme, if our listeners, viewers are not aware. It's a scheme set up by industry and National Cyber Security Centre. Yeah. It's a two-part scheme, isn't it? There's a self-assessment and then there's a Cyber Essentials Plus, which is a technical assessment. Do you want to just talk through the 5 kind of key areas that it covers?
Yeah, of course. So, so as you say, it's an NCSC program.
Yeah.
So the sort of 5 key areas start on the perimeter. So firewall and boundary security. So thinking about that firewall boundary in the context of both the network, so maybe the office that the law firm's at, and also maybe think about the device as well. Then we've got patch management and ensuring that updates both to the operating system and third-party software are applied as well. We've got malware protection. That's obviously really important, so ensuring that there's AV deployed on the device as well. We've got the general secure configuration of that machine as well. That's also really important. So that can cover all aspects from, sort of from encryption to those kinds of things. So a set of controls that's really comprehensive, and a baseline that deals with all organisations. And I think measuring maturity against those controls is really important.
And the baseline is the key, isn't it? This provides a really good baseline. It's almost like a starting point of what good looks like, and then you build up from that, because it's the minimum standard, really, isn't it?
It is really, This is this is a really good set of controls that any organisation can look to employ within their environment and measure their maturity against.
So we'll talk a little bit about some of the other vulnerabilities, but before we do that, Aaron, you were going to mention a specific case, without obviously going into the.
Yeah, no, it's fine. I mean, the examples, it's not, so it was a conveyancing transaction. Someone's purchasing a property. So we've acted where the victims lost their money in this type of transaction. I'll explain that through in a moment. And then we've helped them either recover the money through a claim against a bank or against their lawyers for negligence, because they've allowed the cybersecurity breach to happen through a lack of that kind of end-to-end controls process. So what would happen here is someone will be undertaking a purchase of the property. A cyber criminal will interpose, get involved in the email thread, set up rules to change direction of emails. They will impersonate the law firm. They will spoof an email address. They will impersonate the lawyer and then tell the client, we're changing bank account details, transfer the money for the purchase to this other bank account, not the bank account details we gave you before.
Right.
And that's happened on too many occasions in our sector. And in this instance, an individual lost £445,000 purchasing their property through making a series of transactions. The banks didn't do enough to protect them. Financial Ombudsman, through some work we did, has compensated them for the full amount of their loss. But when we're thinking about security, a part of the way I look at it, it's not just about the education you give to your people and your team. You've got to educate your customer users, your clients. So I think it's really important. As I was saying about the suppliers, that's really important as well. Anyone you work with needs to understand, or they need to give you assurance. But we need to tell our clients there's so much ability out there for criminals to impersonate, or the skill set is so good. they need to be on top of the risks as well and those alerts. And so I think a part of a law firm security program should be also, how do you educate your clients to help you spot the risk? Because sometimes the risk is really subtle, and they're the ones who can help you.
So that's interesting. So how would a law firm do that? Because as you said earlier, it's a service that you charge for, 1/10 of an hour, but your charges are for a service that's related specifically to the work that you're doing.
Yeah.
But there's also a need to educate the clients around security good practice. So where does that come from then? So how do you build that into the program? Is that something that would be done kind of at a national level, or?
So the way we deal with it is it's usually at the onboarding stage of a client.
Right.
So we will we'll direct clients to certain parts of our terms and conditions about saying that this would be the protocol if we were changing our bank account details. We ensure when they're sending payments to us, we get test payments. We make sure they speak to someone they've actually spoken to at the law firm already. So they recognize the voice, they know who they're speaking to verify after the certain test payment, have we received it? In that conversation, we make sure that they know that if there's any kind of change to anything in relation to our bank account details, they're informed about it. So that's all locked into kind of terms and conditions and engagement and onboarding. But we also alert them. It's just the nature of the work we deal with in terms of fraud. We always alert them, say, look, it's very easy for phone numbers to be spoofed. Easy for email addresses to be spoofed. So if anything doesn't seem correct, make sure you speak to someone you know in the law firm.
Okay.
And we just put them on a slightly higher alert.
Do you think that's normal in the legal sector, or is it just because of the work that your firm does and the environment that you work in? I guess it's because it's litigation. You're sort of more aware of the risks. Is that normal in?
I don't think it's normal. No, I think we do it because it's the area of law we work in, and we obviously do some commentary about this kind of education on trying to avoid being scammed, being defrauded. It would be nice for it to be rolled out more, because we're swamped with the volume of communications. People are not just busy; people are overwhelmed. And that's what happens where you get, I think, from my outward look into the cyber security risks, your people are overwhelmed in an organization, so they don't pay attention to processes and procedures. They just want to get their job done, or they inadvertently click on things because they're just too busy and they don't have time to stand back and think.
We see it all the time.
So it's the same process for clients as well. They are overwhelmed, busy, and sometimes involved in quite a stressful piece of work. And criminals are really good at spotting those type of human gateways.
So, I mean, we're kind of limited on time and we're not going to solve all the problems here, but I wanted to just quickly cover off some of the key areas. So we talked about assets. We talked about some of the important kind of data assets and obviously the physical assets and so on. Alison, you talked a little bit about audit and there's also risk management, isn't there? Because that's quite key. You can understand where your risks are. I don't know if you want to say anything more about.
Yeah, I think one of the things I'd like to bring up really is about, as you said, really about understanding data as an asset and actually making sure that you know what it is. And actually, when you look at things like, not just from a data protection perspective, but also from an organisational perspective, you need to understand the value of your information to make sure that you've got proportionate controls in place. And organisations don't have a finite amount of money. They have to, prioritise the most sensitive and the most important information that they have. And sometimes it just becomes daily currency. People don't necessarily, sort of recognise the value of it. So actually having things like your record of process and activity in place or an asset register around your data assets and understanding who you're sharing it with, who's got access to it, how it's protected, how long you're keeping it for. It's really important because that not only helps you with your GDPR compliance, but it helps you to identify the risks that you've got as well. And I think it's really important that you mentioned, obviously we've talked about technology, but the people and the process is just as important because, it only takes an user to inadvertently click on a phishing email or not to follow a process actually for somebody to actually then get a foot into the organisation and then actually have the ability to potentially then compromise your information. And actually in these cases as well, it's not just about information that we talk about under GDPR. There's also legally privileged information as well, which is, protected from disclosure. But actually a cyber attacker's not going to actually take any notice of that. That's going to be there, with everything else that they actually, sort of take from you. So I think that's important to note really is actually how can you how can you confidently say that you're protecting your data if you don't know what it is?
Yeah.
So it's really important that you know what information you have and you know how you're protecting it, and actually you're addressing any risks that you've identified as a result of that. And if you take that into consideration with things like Cyber Essentials, which will identify your technical risks, then actually that's going to put you on a really good standing, really, to actually understand where your gaps are and put some processes in to address them. It's my understanding as well that the Lexel standards for quality, legal quality, actually do include a requirement or a recommendation to actually for law firms to actually go down the Cyber Essentials route and to have information security policies in place. So if organisations want to reach that quality standard, then they should be looking at doing those things as well, because it's, you know, it's going to actually provide some assurance to their clients, but it's also going to protect their business as well.
So in terms of a roadmap, so Cyber Essentials is a starting point. So the self-assessment part of Cyber Essentials covers some information assurance requirements. And then there's the Cyber Essentials Plus, which, as you explained, Rob, covers 5 key kind of sort of technical areas. But so that's your baseline, isn't it?
Yeah. So Cyber Essentials as a whole covers all of those areas. The first piece is kind of a self-assessment process, which is reviewed by an assessor, and that allows you to sort of establish the presence of those controls. The Plus assessment takes that one step further by reviewing some of those things technically. It's completed by an external assessor.
Right.
So we undertake those assessments for clients, both stages. And then kind of in terms of, you were talking there about maturity, so moving on to then other different types of assessment, really depending on the size of the law firm, the particular risks that they've got. We've talked about quite a wide variety of topics here, from kind of on-prem infrastructure and traditional paper, and then into cloud services. And the types of assessment that are relevant to each firm may differ based on the size of that organisation and then the types of, you know, the types of cases that they're working on, and therefore the types of assets that they've got, and how far through their kind of physical to digital or on-prem to cloud migration they are.
And so, depending on the size of the law firm, I guess there'll be an element of outsourcing. So outsourcing providers coming in and looking after or managing your IT environment. You're already outsourcing if you go into the cloud, because it'll be, you know, let's face it, it'll either be Microsoft or Amazon, unless it's private cloud. So there's various third parties involved in managing your environment. So Rob, I wonder if you would just talk a little bit about the kind of things that a law firm, or again, any firm really, but because we're talking about legal sector here, a law firm would need to do to manage all of these third parties to make sure that the security needs are met. So, you know, so you've got third parties, you've got cloud environments managed by Microsoft or Amazon. You might have an outsourcing provider.
Yeah, it can be quite a complicated landscape, can't it? When you've got multiple providers involved, each of them have got their own sort of areas that they'll be dealing with. So I think first of all, it's probably key to understand kind of what products have we got, what services have we got, and which area of the business or which part of the problem are they solving. Then we need to think about, are there any gaps in between those? Okay, and that's probably gaps that are being filled with perhaps manual processes, perhaps slightly weaker areas of the business. Then we can say, well, each of these solutions and providers, what have we got in terms of contracts? As Alison was talking earlier around, you know, what's involved, what's covered in that contract. We talked about what features are in the software and whether they're enabled. And then sort of roles and responsibilities as well. So if some of those services are outsourced, you know, what are the requirements on that outsourced provider? Are they keeping that up to date?
There's often a shared responsibility, isn't there?
There could well be a shared responsibility model, So you see with those sort of large cloud providers, the shared responsibility models, there's an expectation from them that the consumer of the cloud service, which in this case would be the law firm, will fulfill those, but that isn't necessarily checked by anybody. So ensuring that, you know, a good understanding of kind of where we're at, I think is important, and across all of those products. Once we've got that, can then look at what's the best way to test and measure and monitor those controls.
Right.
So
okay.
if things need to be updated, if certain configurations need to be in place, if certain training needs to be done, how are we both doing that, and then how are we ensuring that that's actually happening?
Yeah. And I suppose quite importantly, how do we know that the controls are effective?
Yes.
So you might outsource, or your outsourcing providers providing your IT, but how do we know that it's meeting your needs? How do we know that everything is up to date? So Cyber Essentials is an annual process, isn't it? You self-assessment, and then the independently assessed part of this. It's all done once every 12 months.
It is. It's
what happens in between?
Point in time assessment. So it's sort of equivalent to an MOT for a vehicle.
Yeah.
So it gives you an idea that at that point in time, these things were at a known position.
Yeah.
But it doesn't sort of look at things then again, potentially until 12 months on.
That's a really good example. Sorry to interrupt you, Rob, but just to touch on the MOT, you still have to maintain your car in between the MOT periods.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, when you turn up to the MOT station, then you're faced with a huge bill because you've got all of these things that you haven't.
So when you MOT your vehicle, there's an expectation that you're going to keep it sort of road legal for the 12 months. And the same with Cyber Essentials. There's a requirement there. That to maintain that certification, that you're maintaining those level of controls.
Yeah.
So to help maintain those controls, you've got to do more than just that one-off annual assessment. You've got to be involved in an ongoing kind of program of sort of work, really.
Yeah. And I guess it depends on the size of the law firm as well, and budgets and things like that. If a small law firm won't be able to afford, some of the complicated services that, cybersecurity providers provide. So it's managing that, isn't it, Aaron? It's just understanding where your risks are. And
yeah, I think so. But I think there's kind of like some maturity to it. Like, as Alison said, you've got to understand what are your assets. What is the data you hold? How valuable is it? And actually think, what's the downside to us if this goes wrong? What's the risk? And that should lean into telling you how much do you need to invest in cybersecurity support. It can be fatal for a law firm. I've seen law firms that fail because of it. So it can be fatal. So everything says invest more in ensuring it's safe. It's the same with fraud. Actually, it's a real simple analogy. We say the prevention is so much better than the cure in terms of cost, and I think the same is around this type of area.
Really good point. So I just wanted to finish off because we've talked about prevention. Cyber Essentials is a preventative technique, I suppose. Risk assessments, training. There's also things like penetration testing and, adversary simulation. Depending on the size of the problem, if you like, or the size of the risk, you put an appropriate control in place. The more you have to lose, the more you would sort of spend, if you like, to try and spend in terms of resource and effort to protect it. But let's finish up by just talking about post-incident. So a lot of organizations focus on preventative techniques, and this is not just in the legal sector. It's in lots of sectors we see this, don't we, Rob? So there's a lot of effort put into preventing a cyber attack, but there's not much effort put into considering what would we do if we were subjected to a cyber attack. So how would we manage a cyber incident? So Alison, do you want to talk a little bit about what an organisation should have in place to manage a cyber incident?
Yep, definitely. So I think going back first and foremost, it's actually about understanding roles and responsibilities. And actually, the first thing to say, it's not about if you had a cyber incident, it's when. So it's about preparing for an event and being able to test out your plans. So what we encourage organisations to do is to make sure they have a cyber incident response plan in place, and then to conduct a tabletop exercise as a minimum, and maybe even go further and do almost like a mock run through as well to actually test the effectiveness of their incident response plans. Quite often we find, depending on organisation size and depending on how they're supported, sometimes organisations will rely on a key person. If that person's not available, their whole plan can fall apart. So it's really important to do that. And particularly where you've got third parties involved, is recognising that they're part of your incident response process. The whole idea of a plan really is to make sure that in the event of an incident, you've got actually a bit of an aid memoir to help you. We'd encourage organisations to put together run books for common incidents like ransomware or compromised credentials or denial of service. And then we, like I say, run through and do a tabletop exercise to actually identify how effective that is in the event of an incident, and then to take your learning and use that to inform and update your plan so that you're in a better position in the event of being, sort of involved in a cybersecurity incident. One of the key things we do see is actually, sort of a assumption around roles and responsibilities, which is why it's really important to have that incident response plan and to include a RACI matrix within that as well, so that roles and responsibilities are clear from the outset. And there isn't any sort of ambiguity when you're running around in, headless chicken mode because something's happened.
Yeah. Is cyber response, is that built into GDPR requirements? Is there a need for an organisation to have a response plan?
So within GDPR requirements, actually, it's not prescriptive, but actually it's about protecting the confidentiality, integrity and availability of information. So actually, if you were to make a report to the ICO, they would very much, part of their reporting form is actually, is this due to a cyber incident? Is the incident still ongoing? If an organisation failed to have effective plans in place and effective, sort of capabilities to restore from backup, then yes, that would definitely be seen as a lack of, sort of security control. But the other thing that needs to be considered is actually, quite often if information is taken by, a cyber attacker and then it's published on the dark web, then they'd be looking at it from a breach, from a compromise, from a disclosure perspective as well. So it's looking at actually what controls you've got in place to protect the confidentiality of information, and to actually make sure, you maintain its integrity. So obviously if somebody takes it and encrypts it, then you haven't got that information anymore. But availability is very much being seen as much of an issue. And actually there've been some recent cases where the availability of information has impacted on the availability of critical services. And we've actually seen the ICO issue their first fine to a processor as well as a controller in this instance. So, that's really quite a turning point. So I think that's actually a really powerful message to get across when you're working with third parties, is that actually there's a shared responsibility, and particularly if you've got the right controls in place. But yeah, from a GDPR perspective, protecting and securing your information is to secure it from, like I say, secure it so that it's available as much as anything else as well, which means that in the event of an incident that compromises that information and sort of results in it being unavailable, then you could be, sort of falling foul of GDPR.
Thank you, Alison. It's very interesting. So as our guest, Arun, you can have the final say. Any final thoughts on cybersecurity within the legal sector?
I think just as a roundup, I think we have to take it incredibly seriously. I think it is, it's a real threat here and now. And there's one anecdote I remember is that, people see cyber as some kind of, computer mechanism and way, we're going to be infiltrated. There's no computer that's ever gone to prison. There's people here who are actually going out of their way to cause damage to your organization and take your assets or your data for monetary gain or otherwise. So this is a very real live threat.
Yeah.
We have to have a proportionate response and, make sure it's part of your everyday thinking.
I like that. The computer's not going to prison. I might nick that from you, actually.
I nicked it from someone else.
How do you?
Pass it along.
Although you are a litigation lawyer, so I'll have to be careful if I use it.
That was a good one.
Okay, so I think we'll finish there. We could talk about this for hours, couldn't we? Because there's such a huge topic, but I think we'll finish it there. We might have another podcast on some of the specifics around this, but thank you for listening. If you like what we are talking about and you want to hear more or want us to do future podcasts, please comment and subscribe to our channel. But that's all for now. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening to our cybersecurity podcast. If you're keen to learn more, please visit our website www.aristi.co.uk. Cybersecurity made simple.